Okay, so this is going to be some more stuff on the diminished scale. So I covered the diminished arpeggio, which is derivative of the harmonic minor scale. But now we can also move into the next step of diminished, which is going into the full diminished scale. So there's a lot of stuff to cover, so I want to just do the basics right now. And the first thing is the scale. There's a lot of ways to look at the scale, but let's look at it as for example, just, since I said that, one way to look at the scale is we take the diminished 7 arpeggio, which comes from the 3rd, 5th, flat 7, or flat 9. Those are all the roots. We can play the diminished 7th arpeggio from. That last video covers that pretty good. But this, if we also take the diminished 7 arpeggio 1 fret below, so that would be starting from A, C, E flat, or F sharp. That diminished 7 arpeggio, if we combine it with, if we take those two and combine them, that's the full diminished scale. There's 2 types. If you think about it, which I'm not going to explain right now, it would take up a lot of time, but there's 2 diminished scales. One that starts, that has a root and then goes to the natural 9 and then flat 3rd, and then the second type of diminished scale starts from the root and goes up a half step, and then a whole step. Starts with a half. One starts with a whole, one starts with a half. The one we're concerned with is the one that starts with a half step. So when we would call this A diminished, just A diminished, and it's used for an A diminished, the dominant chord. So when you want to take an A7 and take it out, the diminished scale is one group to go. So the first step is, what I want to do is just go over the scale itself. Now in the video, there's a couple of things. One is, the first thing is that I have a pattern. This pattern is just the what I call brite diminished, which is the diminished 7 I did last time, starting from the 3, 3rd, 5th, flat 7, and flat 9. See, I just call that the brite diminished. It makes it easier. So when I say brite diminished, that's what I'm talking about. And then dark diminished are the diminished 7th arpeggio notes that coming from the root, flat 3rd, or sharp 9. We can call that the tritone, and the 6, F sharp. That one's darker. So that one's a little bit brighter. I think it's the tritone that makes it so dark, plus the sharp 9. It's just so anyway, this pattern strictly stays. This is the first pattern that I start out the video with. That stays with the just one diminished, the brite diminished. So if we wanted to make that on dark diminished, obviously we could just move it down 1 fret. Yeah, right there, or up here. And then there's a couple of other patterns. This group of 16 notes that I have in the beginning of the video. These are just some ideas to do on the brite diminished scale, or any diminished scale. But there's some patterns. There's some cool patterns to practice. And then I have one that goes. So that's sort of a way to add chromatics. Taking this and just taking that little shape and moving it down chromatically until we come to the next diminished group. Then taking these 2 notes, moving them down chromatically. Then we have another diminished 7 grouping, and then chromatic. This goes chromatic. That's what that is. And then in the video I have some improv with the actual scale. So that's what the next thing I'll have written out in tab will be the full scale. So the scale itself is kind of an interesting thing. It's going to repeat every 3 frets, right? So, but if we're thinking A, we'll start it out in the area around the A pentatonic minor, or the A7 6th string. We'll start it from here. So let me start it. It's almost easier to explain the scale starting from up high. So because up top we get 4 notes on this string here, but it repeats. It's an interesting scale in the symmetry of it. Whereas, so on this string, right, there's our root. When we have groups of 3, notice I'm using my first and pinky and then second finger, right? So on the next string down, it's going to be same grouping of fingers except third finger. Second finger on this one, still using the first and pinky. But then the third finger comes in. Second finger, third finger. Then it's back to second finger. Then it's back to third finger. So it's always first and pinky. That stays the same for the top 4 strings. What changes is the middle finger. So we get second finger, third finger, second finger, third finger. Now here is where we, for the rest of the way down, we stay with the third finger. But we're going to do a slide. So it's pinky, third, first, slide down 1. And that sets us right up to pinky, third, first, slide down 1, pinky, third, first, slide down 1. And then of course the root, in this case, is A. We're thinking of it as A. It has, 4 roots, but we're thinking of this as an A. So obviously, this exact same scale pattern, we play in reverse. Now we can use a slide. So slide, third finger, slide, third finger, slide, third finger. So if we go up 3 frets to the C7 area, those are the same notes. So when you're in A, if you play a lick here, same here. It'll be different notes, but they'll still be in the A7 diminished scale. I didn't play that lick right at all. Let's just go with that. And then I go up 3 more frets to the E flat zone, and then up to the F sharp. And the lick I come up with there is the same every 3 frets. So, but let's just, that's good to know. But for now, it's good to start practicing it, kind of in this area around the A. So, now the next thing I write out after I write out the scale up and down is some of those lines I was playing. Just the diminished scale here. I screwed up a little bit, but I'm trying not to even add chromatics because the scale itself is so sort of melodic. There's a lot of melody in the scale, and there's so many ways to look at this scale that I'm trying to just focus on one aspect instead of breaking out into the arpeggios. Notice I'm also not using the diminished 7 arpeggio here because I'm trying to just focus on the scale. But that's another thing. So if you're already good at the diminished 7 arpeggio, you can take the scale and throw that in at any time. Back to the scale. 7 arpeggio. Scale. But I want to stick to the scale in this video because there's a lot of cool sort of melodic ideas that are inside that scale, without reverting to arpeggios, because there's a lot. So obviously we have the diminished 7 arpeggio, but we also have the other diminished 7 arpeggio, the dark one. So there's 2. So wherever you have that first diminished 7 arpeggio, you can just drop 1 fret. So you have 2. Right in a row. E flat. But the scale itself has has a very different sound than if you just play the arpeggios for some reason. It's very different. So there's sort of like those two different ways to approach it. I think that covers everything for the scale. Next, we'll get into the triads that you can play. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do with triads. And then there's also another aspect of the scale that I want to get into, which is just the basic idea of melodic ideas that utilize, notice I've been just playing the diminished seventh arpeggio, and then I'll say, okay, now go to the one right below it. But that's really splitting them up, so there's cool ways to, there's licks that sort of combine the two, dark and bright, but that are patterns, instead of just like randomly playing the scale. So the scale is obviously a combination of both diminished seventh arpeggios. But since the diminished scale is so symmetrical, there are a lot of patterns like that. But that one's just using the bright diminished. But there are cool patterns that like use the bright and dark combined. So those are worth getting into. That's probably the coolest thing about the diminished scale, is the patterns that combine, and because they're repetitive, so you hear a pattern, but then you hear it repeated up 3 frets and then 3 more frets, so it creates, and in that will also include the whole tone device. That's going to be one of the patterns from that idea of combining. So for now, though, I just wanted to get the scale going on. That's really important. So every 3 frets again, that's going to repeat. It'll be the same scale, same fingering. As you become comfortable with it, the strict fingering is not, you want to get away from, the last thing I will say is you want to get away from this scale worrying about the fingering too much. Like notice how I said 3rd finger and then slide, 3rd finger and slide. It's more important with the diminished scale too, because your hand's going to get, as you're doing improv, your hand's going to go out of sync, and it's easy to lose the spot. So it's more important to think of the diminished scale as tensions. In other words, here's on A, so there's my C sharp, and then it's flat 9 and or sharp 9 and flat 9, root, flat 7, the major 6, there's the tritone 5, flat 7, root, sharp 9. So when you're seeing this, you're more seeing the scale tensions, the notes of the scale, rather than just shapes on the fretboard. Like for example, the pentatonic scale, if you play it in a different key, they usually play in like B flat. You don't really have to think about the notes at all. You just take your basic box shape, and you know where the blue note is, and it's great. It's a great way to So in all those other keys, you don't have to worry. But with diminished, it's a little easier to become familiarized with the keys and understand because you'll end up in weird spaces where for some reason it's just harder to memorize the scale just purely as a scale. You have to kind of have the notes of the chord and the tensions of the chord sort of in the back of your mind. It helps a lot. I found that when I just learned diminished scale as a scale, like, I know the fingerings, I have them memorized, and there's going to be no problem with my improv. I'm going to just diminish like crazy, and it just didn't work out that well. I found I was always, like, where's the scale? I don't, until I really understood A7 as a triad, and then understood that diminished has. So I should cover that too. The diminished scale has the 1-3-5, of course. Flat 7 is a dominant. Alright, sorry. And then for inside tensions, we have the 6. So tritone or blue note. And then this thing that makes it really dark are the nines, the altered nines. The flat 9, and the sharp 9. Cliche bebop lick, A major arpeggio, flat 9, sharp 9, A, G, fall into the F sharp, because A7 pulls to D, or to D minor, pull to the F. So in a jazz sense, on a 2/5, on the A7 is where we'll put the diminished scale. Whether we're going to D minor or D major doesn't matter. It would sort of be a substitution if we're going to D minor. Either way, it's a sub. You know, you can. I've seen the diminished scale used over in 2/5s of D, whether it's D minor or D major. And another good place with the diminished scale, which I was playing in the beginning, is just like over a vamp. You know, over an extended A7. About covers it. And I think that about wraps us up. Alright, cool. Any questions? Let me know about the diminished scale. I have that stuff out in tab. Subscribe if you enjoy this channel or getting any help. I know the quality is not the best, but the licks, it's all about the licks. Yeah, so please subscribe if you could, and ask any questions or comments, criticisms. I need those too. And cool. Thanks. I'll see you next time.